Hey everyone, welcome back to Altengrad City in City Skylines. This is what we built in the previous episode, the botanical garden with the new tram loop in front of it and lots of new city blocks and farms. Today we will stay nearby. We will revisit some old areas, build some modern buildings, do lots of expansion and landscaping, and completely wrap up the city building on this side of the river. And we are also going to cover one of the largest areas ever in the series. So no time to waste, let's jump right into it. We are going to start with this intersection, or around this intersection that was directly in the center of that previous shot. Now, I'm not really sure if you guys remember, I don't even remember the number of episodes where we built this, but this is the modern part with those modern residential development area and the tram loop. I think the first tram loop that we did in the city. So this was such a long time ago that some of these roads, intersections, and just techniques that I was using are kind of dated. So I was revisiting this place even in terms of the detailing at first and doing some kind of changes either with the tools or just the recent knowledge that I have about certain things. So for example, I was redoing the procedural objects cobblestones on the intersection and kind of extending it around this area and doing some kind of changes to the wires of the trams as well, and all these different tweaks so that the place is just going to be a bit up to date. Now, the basic plan and what I really thought is going to be the focus of today's episode, which it eventually wasn't really, because the focus is just going to be the sheer expansion that we're going to do today. But at first, I really wanted to focus mostly on these modern buildings, right on the side of this intersection, on one side of it, because this intersection is kind of interesting. On one side, you have some, let's say, 18th century blocks, or perhaps even, well, actually, no, 19th century blocks, definitely not 18th, 19th century blocks with maybe a couple of buildings from early 20th, very early 20th. And then you have, obviously, that modern expansion, those buildings, the white buildings, those are 1920s. And on this side, what I'm preparing, I'm just kind of doing a bit of a research, what I have at my disposal here, but these structures, those are all 1930s. So very, very new buildings that I would like to really put around this intersection. Now, not only around this intersection, but also this general part of the city is probably going to be, even going forward with the time progression, is probably going to be reserved for these kinds of new office buildings. So this is probably going to be the office, maybe like financial area of the city, which right now is on the edges because that makes sense. That's where the space is, and it's fairly still close to the busiest part of the city. There's obviously the tram connecting everything. So you can easily just reach this place, no problem. It's not really like a suburb or anything, even though we are going to do suburbs kind of close by. I mean, at the end of the day, Altengrad is not really that big, so it's not like you cannot really reach these outer edges of the city that well. Now, when I was preparing those pallets of buildings that I could place there, by the way, that big building with the circular part on the footprint, that's the Apollo building. I'm not exactly sure where from, I think from the Netherlands, but what's most important is that it's built in the Art Deco style from the 1930s, so it perfectly fits this time period. And actually, not counting the churches, it is the tallest building in the city right now. So that's kind of cool that we are preparing this kind of like a skyscraper, quotation marks, area of the city. So, maybe that's how it's going to continue even going forward. Anyway, what's also important in this part is the landscaping, all these different connections outside of the city, doing something with the railway here, very, very similar what we did in the previous episode. So, I always knew that I don't want to expand the city indefinitely in this area because obviously, if the terrain was kind of flat over here, then I could do that. Like there is no stopping really. Also, I needed some justification to not really build the remnants of the city walls in this area. So I really wanted to play with the landscaping and make it look like the city simply couldn't expand past this ridge where I'm just going to put this tower in here because this view, as you can see, would be absolutely amazing, just overlooking the entire city. And this is just something I really wanted to do. I really wanted to cut the city at some line and not really expand it past it. I'm not even going to do any farms over here. I'm just going to do this this ridge with only the tower, these paths, very nice paths, and trees. Just going to be covered with big forests. So it's also going to be a nice area for like hiking and just chilling in these kinds of forests on some kind of trails, because we have that tram loop that is ending by that, right there, by that modern residential quarter. It was probably built very recently. I mean, the buildings themselves are from 1920s, so I suppose that even the tram loop extension and all the infrastructure around it is from the same time period. Back in the day, I'm thinking, by the way, this road right on the side of the screen on the left side, I'm thinking that's probably the old road that used to go out of the city and probably even connect to the very, very old bridge that is only ruins today, if you remember, right below that steel one. So maybe that used to be the medieval road into the city, and everything kind of grew around it. This tower is obviously also super old. Well, maybe actually not that old. Maybe it's like a historism style. It was maybe built quite recently as well, mostly for these kinds of purposes, to have some kind of like a tiny little cafe down and just allow people to just sit at those tables and look at the city. So that's actually why I'm also going to do these little like openings in the forest in here, so that the view on the from the base of the tower is not really obstructed in any way, which is actually something that I have seen recently in real life, and it really piqued my interest. These kinds of tourist towers from like 100 years ago or something like that, because they are just absolutely amazing. You can just really go from the city and walk up to these towers quite easily, just a couple of kilometers, and you can just chill at the top. You can even go up to the tower if you really want to, but it's not really necessary, and just take a look at the rest of the city. It's just a couple of hours, spent doing this. So I really wanted to do something like that in Altengrad, and this place felt absolutely perfect for it. I don't think that we're gonna have any more opportunities anywhere else, because this is just a good area for it. What else am I supposed to say? Anyway, what was I saying? Oh yeah, the tower, so that's probably done. Now let's focus on these railways and the connections outside of the city. So this is the railway that continues from that harbor area. Now, again, just like in the previous episode, this railway was just built temporarily towards the edge of the map. As you can see, I have those train stations there, so I can control the behavior of the steam trains a bit better, so they can have a place to turn around, so the locomotive is always at the front, and so on and so on, these kinds of things. So you're not really supposed to see that in the normal views of the city, obviously. It's like the maintenance area, let's call it. Also, I keep there the palette for the low density buildings, so don't worry, that's obviously not supposed to be there. Just imagine it's not there, okay? Now I have to do this landscaping. At this point, I already had the new version of the network multi-tool, so that already allowed me to select multiple nodes on these railways, so I could align the slope. And I was taking a look at the grades, and I was aiming for something around 1%, because this is also going to be a cargo railway as well as passenger railway, so kind of need to keep it a bit smoother. And then I just created this little valley, because this map, the Copper Creek map, is a bit steep on the edges pretty much everywhere, so it's not really that super well suited for railways just radiating outside of the city pretty much in all directions, just like I have it in here. But I kind of do want to have railways and roads radiating from the city, because Altengrad is supposed to be probably like a capital, or at least like a center of some smaller region, let's say, because like I said, the city is just not all that big, but that's just how it needs to be in City Skylines. Can't really build huge capital cities. It has to be kind of scaled down anyway. So, maybe we just need to use our imagination and think of Altengrad as much larger city. So, these kinds of connections are warranted. Anyway, doing some kind of farm fields along the river just to finish all those places. And this is actually kind of unusual. I don't really do the farm fields in the middle of the project, really. But at this point, I wasn't really sure how to continue the city itself, how to do the expansion. So I just did what I knew that needs to be done, and those were the farm fields in this direction. So there's this ridge with only the forest that I talked about, which is nicely going to just cut the city expansion right there, which is exactly what I wanted to do here. And now we're going to return back into the unfinished blocks and do some expansion. So this is how I'm going to do it in today's episode. I'm mostly just going to skip through this because this is just the block expansion. We have seen this a million times before. This is actually one of the last expansions, though, with these kinds of buildings, to be completely honest, because by the way, this kind of leads me to mentioning that Altengrad is really closing in on that finishing line, towards that finishing line of the 1930s. There are only a handful of episodes left where I would like to just wrap up the downtown part. And these kinds of 19th century blocks, let's say, those are actually not going to be that common. I think I'm only going to do them in the next episode a bit, and that's pretty much going to be it. Then I have planned some maybe early 20th century, even the 30s, like villas and stuff like that. Some kind of fancy buildings that I still have, unique buildings, big ones. Lots of industry, and that's pretty much going to be it. But anyway, even though that this might be the last expansion of this kind, it's still something that we have seen many times before, so it's not really that critical to show it. But like I say, again, many times before, it's kind of the quantity that counts with this particular kind of expansion, because, most realistic cities are just like residential blocks all around. They are not really like super fancy projects or around every corner, right? Especially these kinds of European cities, I suppose. You have the center, some kind of squares, and that's pretty much it at the end of the day, isn't it? Yeah, sure, some kind of industrial projects and infrastructure projects in between that. But you do need that expansion. You do need that quantity just to be able to call it somewhat realistic, okay? Now, speaking of those interesting projects, let's return to that square, because I finally got the ideas how this place needs to be made. And I was actually heavily looking at real life maps of 1930s or like early 20th century cities, and I was really taking inspiration from real life a lot for this one, because I was completely lost and I really needed some kind of push. So this particular building that I'm putting together over right here, I think that these structures are kind of new. I was just searching Art Deco in the workshop, or just Deco, because Steam Workshop doesn't really search well multiple words. But I managed to find a couple of really nice looking, grand looking structures. Perhaps not super Central European looking, but we are going to make a few exceptions with the styles here and there. I also downloaded a very, very fancy pack of low density buildings. I think that white building that I placed there is actually part of it. In there I placed it as some kind of a guardhouse maybe, or something like that, gatehouse at the back of this fancy building, which is probably supposed to be a hotel. Yeah, it's probably going to be a hotel. That's probably why this parking lot at the back is here for, and overall the detailing around it is going to tell you that it probably is. Now, if you are living in Prague, or are you familiar with how Prague looks like, then this is probably going to remind you of the hotel. Yeah, and I again forgot its name because all the hotels kind of have very similar names. Intercontinental Hotel, I think. I'm not really sure. Even though the one in Prague was built in 50s, I believe, so that's not exactly super accurate. But I'm just taking the inspiration for the shape, not really the buildings. And like I said, these buildings that I'm using for this project, those are actually built pre-war. So, that's going to be all good. So it's going to be just, like I said in the beginning, it's going to be a nice transition. The square has everything. The square has like late 19th century. It has 20s, 30s, so it's going to be really good. And it also connects to that modern road, which is going to be like the main entrance into the city from this direction. So a very lively part of the city, I should say. It's going to combine all these different elements, which is kind of going to tell you that, throughout the decades, this part of the city definitely received a lot of attention, and it's always trying to just keep it modernized. So that was also the reason why I, for example, removed, which is something I haven't done yet in Altengrad ever. I removed already built block right there, and I decided to use some of those 1920s or 30s blocks or row buildings there. So those are supposed to be, I think they are residential buildings in the game, but I'm thinking of them as some kind of offices. Actually, it might be even residential, why not? And obviously with shops in the first floors or something like that. Later I'm going to put some garages in the backyard, going to make it really, really good looking. Finally good looking backyards in Altengrad, huh? Now, what I'm doing in here, it might not be super obvious where it is. It's right on the side of that main entrance that I was talking about into the city. And I'm going to zoom out in just a couple of seconds anyway to give you a better idea where this is. Now, this is obviously a residential area. This is a residential development. And this is supposed to be something that has been built or is being built like super recently. I'm not going to fill all those blocks with the buildings. I was actually taking a very, very close inspiration. This is almost like one-on-one copy from certain expansions from Prague that I was just observing on 1938 maps, I believe. So just before the war, and they looked exactly like that. So they had a couple of the asphalt road blocks, and they were not completely filled with the buildings. These are kind of like 2-floor, row houses, very similar to what you might see in the UK, for example. But obviously the styles of the individual buildings are a bit different, but the layout is kind of similar, even though, well, maybe not really, but you probably get the idea. You obviously see it on the screen, what I'm building. So those are not going to be all complete. They are going to be gaps in the blocks, and actually some of the blocks are not even going to be completed with the infrastructure. There are going to be some mud roads. Have I built them already? I'm not really sure. No, I haven't. Okay, so later I'm going to build mud roads that are just going to continue the lines of some of the streets that are already placed there. And around these very orderly looking blocks, I'm also going to add some kind of streets that are not really orderly, that are actually kind of twisting around in this area, which might give you the impression that those are obviously older and maybe like even super old. And on a couple of these twisting roads, there are going to be some of those row houses that are much, much older, like 100 years older easily in this time period. Now also I'm going to make some use of these 1920s buildings, I believe, from Oslo. So, just a couple of blocks in here really to fill this place. I suppose that this area overall has been largely empty before these time periods, before these decades, obviously. And these kinds of structures that I'm placing there is probably some kind of like not exactly like rich people housing or something like that. Probably like workers' houses of that nearby factory area that I am actually going to continue building because we are on the side of that big train station, and railways. We have to have some kind of industry around railways. That's how it's been done back in the day, so we need to have that. And obviously, like I said, Altengrad is not like super big or anything, so even people working on the other side of the city can easily just live here and go to work every day. It's kind of close to that intersection with the trams, so no big deal. Now, I'm kind of done with the rough shape of definitely the infrastructure and even some of these building blocks, so more farms. Again, we have seen this many times before, which is kind of a common theme in Altengrad at this point, but I'm just going to paint some of these surfaces in here, cover them with trees, and kind of, already wrap it up in this part of the city with the edges. So, unlike the previous episodes where I'm kind of sure that the expansion of the city is done there, in this part, I am not really doing the farms everywhere all the way up to the built parts, right? Especially in these places where we have those mud roads and everything, because that's clearly already reserved in the city plan, the urban plan or whatever, in this time period already, in this particular year maybe. That's already reserved for the city expansion. So it's just a matter of time before, the construction crews move in there and start building the rest of the houses. So no point in doing the farms there. So I'm just going to keep it open with the texture of the grass. I was kind of thinking of maybe putting the ruined texture on it, but I'm kind of using a very tiled ruined texture, so it's not really looking good on open spaces. And some kind of decals, they are kind of small, not exactly good for that, so I'm not really sure how to do like future construction sites in city skylines. Maybe construction sites that were already somewhat prepared, with removing grass, for example, or something like that, or the topsoil. But yeah, I'm not really sure how to do that, so I just kept it open, maybe put a couple of trees around the roads, and overall it's just going to be looking fine. Now, what I'm doing in this entire episode, it's probably already kind of clear, but I'm not really detailing all that much. I'm trying to do some kind of like fences that I wouldn't really bother with in some of these blocks that are going to be on the edges of the area, for example, right next to the river, because that's going to be mostly visible, I suppose. But with some of these blocks, I'm not doing detailing pretty much at all, because it's all about the quantity of the buildings, really. It's all about the expansion. And I really want to bother with detailing only at the fancier areas, like this intersection, for example, and the hotel building and all these 1930s recent structures. So that's exactly what we are doing, the detailing. Now, I did some flowers, bushes, the usual stuff in front of the hotel building, even at the backyard. And we are now going to move further down this road and going to do some detailing with these buildings. And we're actually going to do some verticality. Would you believe that? Because we have that parking lot road right there, which I really wanted to keep straight, which means that it's just not going to go at the same level as this tram road. That is the tram road that, by the way, goes from that intersection to that terminus station, right? Kind of like running parallel through this area, compared to the buildings here. Now in here, so we needed to create some kind of stairs, and this area eventually turned out to be a bit too big to only keep it paved, so some kind of planters, and eventually this building is actually going to have lots of green in front of it, so that's very, very good. Some benches here, some really nice details, and this place actually looks kind of like something I might have seen in real life with these new 1930s buildings. So that was surprising, I suppose, and good. Obviously, that's very, very welcome. That every time I build something in Altengrad, I'm trying to build it so that it might be, well, realistic, of course, but as if it might be something I might have seen in real life as well, which is kind of the same thing, but it's just nicer that way to think about it. Now, this is what I was talking about. That's the inner block of this modern row buildings. By the way, the modern buildings are not going all around the block. I just kept some of those 19th century buildings perhaps in there. So it's going to, look like it's been kind of glued to the old structures. Perhaps even the old structures were slightly demolished. And this is the final transition. You can really appreciate from this shot how big of an area we did. And by the way, around that old tram loop, I actually did some demolishing. I got rid of some street layouts, because back in the day when I was building it first, I thought I'm going to be able to continue that, maybe even in the 1930s, but I really have some different plans for that area. And I'm thinking that even in this time period, there might be already plans for expansion, even though that expansion is, obviously going to be stopped by a certain event that is going to come in the next decade, right? And maybe a change of leadership, perhaps, in the city's management. Anyway, I'm really going to do only these, not really only, but mostly going to focus on these aerial shots of the whole area, because that's what counts. We have finally completed 100% in the 1930s this side of the river. And to be perfectly honest, when I was doing that area by that church that you can see there, I only did just the tiny blocks around it. And when I was looking at this whole place, I was thinking, I'm never going to be able to finish this. This was like a year and a half ago or something like that. And look at that. It's done. We're finally able to just do these kinds of low angle shots where we can see the sky in the distance as well. And everything in front of the camera is done how it's supposed to be in this time period. So that's just nice. That's something really satisfying to see because, because it's just done. You know, what else am I supposed to say about this? By the way, I was thinking of recording, before we go any further, some more tram rides. I was thinking of probably doing a tram ride that's going to either originate or end at that tram loop right there. I'm not exactly sure right now. No. Maybe the next one is going to go to the Botanical Garden. But right now, to be perfectly fair, I'm not exactly sure where these lines even go because they are all the same color. I'm obviously using just the dark red because that's going to just also repaint the vehicles because they have the line colors, right? And I kind of want to have that unified. I don't want to have like clown trams running through the city. Anyway, these are the shots of the modern buildings, even with that nice little garage inner backyard of those modern buildings. And I really do like how this turned out. Anyway, guys, next building episode, we are going to return into the downtown of the city. We are going to return to that main train station because that has been left unfinished. So we have a huge task in front of us, which is going to be completing it, building some kind of a train yard on the side of it, lots of industry, actually, and filling some of the empty blocks inside the city with some of the remaining fancy big footprint structures that we still have. And we do have some of those. So guys, thank you for watching today's episode. Hope you liked it. Definitely stay tuned for next episode, and that's going to be all. Oh yeah, and you can do the usual. You can subscribe to the channel if you're new here, putting thumbs up below the video, comments, and becoming channel members if you haven't already. Big thanks to all the channel members that we currently have. Again, thanks for watching, take care, and goodbye.